It is certainly possible that the application of oil or grease to the hair, a practice that would be adopted by African Americans in the 19th century, had an American Indian as well as an African origin. Where did hair straightening in the Black community come from? If you believe it was simply a way for Black Americans to conform to the European standards of beauty, I got news for you. If we are to be honest, many people look at Beyonce's blonde straightened hair as a way for her to look more acceptable to a wider audience. She reminded everyone that that is not the case in the song Formation. I like my baby hair with baby hair and afros. I like my Negro nose with Jackson 5 nostrils. Y'all know y'all heard it. Still, she is accused of conforming to the more European aesthetic, or at least not West African. Beyonce's hair care line she created with her mother Tina is an homage to all the Black women who came before her. What they've done, and many other Black women with hair care lines for that matter, is created products in hopes that Black women could walk out of their homes with confidence that their hair is healthy and beautiful. The hair care trailblazers such as Madam C.J. Walker and Annie Turnbull Malone both refused to sell bleaching creams and never referred to their hair products as straighteners, but as maintenance, as hair growers. In fact, it was mostly white men who promoted skin bleaching to Negroes, such as Dr. Fred Palmer. Madam C.J. Walker's company did sell a skin bleaching cream, but that sold after her death, something she would have never approved of. They were emulating their ancestors, not Europeans. They wanted to perfect the techniques that were passed down to them for generations. During slavery, free and enslaved women would slather their hair with butter, bacon fat, goose grease, and then use a butter knife heated in a can over a fire as a crude curling iron. This is reminiscent of present-day technology of hair tools like the flat iron straightener or the hot comb and hot stove, which are the hot tools that are popular amongst the Black American population. Our American Indian ancestors would use these heated bones as a hot comb and animal grease and plant oils in the same fashion. Enslaved women were even beginning to get creative with other ways and tools that they used to style their hair, such as using things like string, threads, cotton, and even fish eel skin to wrap their hair and preserve and stretch their hair. After this, the enslaved woman would begin to start wrapping their hair using headscarves during the weeks to preserve the hair during the span of the week, and then eventually would unwrap the hair when it was time to be redone the next Sunday when they could finally have free time for maintenance. This way of manipulating the hair would start a trend of Black Americans altering their natural hair texture, with many mothers beginning to alter and change their young children's texture as early as they could, just so it could be more manageable and loose. Chief Garrett Morgan, whose mother is documented as an American Indian, did call his product a hair straightener, and he was the first mass producer of live relaxer by a Black American. Many texts claim that he discovered this technique by mistake, but lye had been used for straightening hair for generations, although Chief Morgan did produce a more gentle formula. Now check this out. In the earlier stages of relaxers which contain lye, it would cause many of these enslaved individuals to lose their hair in general. Unbeknownst to these slaves, the use of relaxers would eventually become a mainstay in the Black American community for generations to come. Lye for cleaning and softening hair have been used on the plantation and by American Indians for centuries. American Indians created the nixtamalization process, which lye is used to soften corn husks to create many of the foods we love in Black American dishes today. Many Black Americans were heavy-handed with the lye, and often what works for one person's scalp and hair doesn't work for another. Annie Malone Turnbull and Madam C.J. Walker noticed how sad Black American women around them were once they lost their hair, and they wanted to change this. From this biography about Annie, it says, as she got older, Annie noticed that many of her sister's friends had patches of missing hair or blisters on their scalps caused by harsh hair straightening products. or from the goose fat, bacon grease, or butter many used to tame rebellious curls and kinks. It made Annie sad. After all, they just wanted to look pretty. So it continues to say, Annie's aunt was an herb doctor, so Annie asked her if she could make something to help her hair grow. Aunt Mary took a pinch from here, a dash from there. She mashed them together and added a thick yellow liquid and shook it all up. This formula would become the main ingredient in all of Annie's hair products. So without Aunt Mary, the herb doctor, there would be no Poro hair products. Aunt Mary was born into slavery. How did she know the best hair care? Well, as the saying goes, our bodies were enslaved, but not our minds, and we are more than capable of anything. The ingredients to the Poro hair grower were 1 pint Vaseline, ox marrow, and geranium oil. All three ingredients that Aunt Mary used in her hair during enslavement that she learned from her mother, knowledge that was passed down for generations and used in the now famous Poro pressing oil, were utilized by American Indians for centuries. The first ingredient, Vaseline or petroleum jelly, was skimmed out of creeks and used as a salve, mosquito repellent, amongst other uses. It became known as Seneca oil. Ox marrow, animal fats, and oils, in this case from an ox or cow, was easier to obtain than the fat from a bear. Bear grease and oils were an American Indian hair staple. Its use for hairstyling became so popular with American Indians that the white Europeans began to market it across the globe. Geranium oil was used for many things by the American Indians, including styling hair and maintaining a healthy scalp, in addition to the pleasant smell. So Annie Malone and Madam C.J. Walker promoted using their products along with a good old hot iron to get the luscious locks, and most importantly, to have a healthy scalp. Skin is our biggest organ, and while what we put in our bodies surely affects the skin, topical treatments are also vital. Aunt Mary, being an herbalist, knew what to put in our bodies. You know who else was a root doctor? Harriet Tubman. Now, Harriet Tubman talks about how she was depressed as a child, understandably so given her circumstances. She writes about how she didn't take care of herself, and that included her hair. But once Harriet had her spiritual awakening, everything changed. Harriet used her knowledge as a herb doctor, knowledge that was passed down to her to survive her journeys to freedom in the American wilderness. For crying babies, she gave them paregoric. To have the dogs lose their scent, she would rub turpentine on her feet, peppers, or even grease. This knowledge was not limited to Harriet. John Warren, a slave from Tennessee, rubbed red pepper on his heels when the dogs pursued. Edward Hicks rubbed onions on his body and later buried himself in the earth to evade the dogs. Others claimed that they would throw off the dog's scent by sprinkling a little turpentine or a particular kind of mud on their feet. Harriet Tubman was known to save lives as a nurse as well. She would use water lilies and geranium to stop dysentery, sassafras tea, and you know what? Let's review all the medicinal herbs that Harriet and other Negroes preferred to use over the white man's medicine. Oh, before we dive into these age-old practices, can you believe many enslavers forbade our ancestors from practicing herbalism? This is from Bridgewater State University. Even though slaves had learned a considerable amount of their medical knowledge from whites, such as how to diagnose ailments based on symptoms, how to conduct bedside manner, and general preventative care for ailments, there was still a stigma against slaves practicing medicine. Many whites did not trust slaves practicing medicine on the plantation or on them. White people at the time saw that the spiritual side of African American medicine as something wholly uncivilized. They looked at people who practiced hoodoo and other forms of spiritual healing as quacks. Many plantation owners forbade their slaves from treating themselves or other slaves with herbal remedies. They feared that enslaved people waited too long before applying treatments, were incompetent, ignorant, and lazy, and were intolerant when ailments got out of hand. There was also the fear that slaves would poison their masters as revenge for mistreatment. Many plantation owners would beat slaves if they were caught practicing medicine. Some white people, however, saw the benefits in allowing slaves to practice medicine, and even had family members saved by the quick action of their slaves where modern medicine had failed. There was such a rise in the number of African American herbalists and medical practitioners that the South Carolina General Assembly passed a law in 1749 that prohibited slaves from being employed by physicians to concoct poisons or administer medicines of any kind. However, slave medicine continued. Many slaves saw medicine as one of the few freedoms left, the freedom to treat their own bodies. Some plantation owners would allow it unless an ailment grew out of hand, while others would only allow it if the physician's aid failed to cure someone. Wow. So all the natural remedies I'm about to go over with you, our enslaved ancestors were not always allowed to use them as they pleased, even if it was the best option. They all would have preferred to use their own remedies that they've relied on for centuries, similar to how we see in the movie Avatar, the back and forth between the humans and the Na'vi on healing. Alright, so these remedies are coming from the book African American Slave Medicine, Herbal and Non-Herbal Treatments. Cotton. Native populations in Alabama use cotton to ease labor pains. Folk practitioners use cotton root bark, inner root bark, and seeds, which they believe were the medicinal parts of the cotton plant. In folk medicine, practitioners have used cotton plants to treat nausea, fever, headache, and diarrhea, expel afterbirths, and treat poor lactation, hemorrhages, dysentery. The second herb is dogwood. Native American groups made a tea from dogwood for fevers. In folk medicine, practitioners use flowering dogwood as a substitute for cinchona or quinine to treat the symptoms of malaria. Gus Smith of Missouri used it to make a tea for colds. Philtown of Georgia made a dogwood tea for worms. The third plant is echinacea. Echinacea, or as it was more commonly referred to by slaves as Samson root, found many uses as illustrated in the WPA narratives. For instance, Philtown from Georgia recalled it being used as a tea for cramps. Annie Ware from Texas remembered it was mixed with camphor or whiskey and red coon for joint pain. The fourth plant being grapes or the muscadine that is native to the Americas. Herbalists report that the grape leaves are an anti-inflammatory and astringent and can be taken for diarrhea, heavy menstrual bleeding, and as a medicinal douche. Grapes, when transformed into raisins, juice, or wine, have also found some medical value. The PDR of herbal medicines noted that the grapes do have an anti-inflammatory effect and may have value for blood circulation disorders. Henry Lewis from Texas reported the use of the grapefruit for swollen feet, and Della Fountain from Oklahoma mixed grapefruit with other herbs as a blood treatment. The fifth plant being sage. The sage plant was used as a cure-all during the Middle Ages. The botanical name for sage, salvia, means to cure in Latin. Native Americans applied sage to sores. Miss Mary Edwards from Texas, who said she was about 127 years old and born a slave in 1810, proclaimed its general use. She said she would boil it into a tea and use it for chills, and many people use it for almost anything. The sixth plant being sassafras. Slave herb doctors relied on sassafras root and bark as treatments for colic, venereal disease, pain, fevers, high blood pressure, rheumatism, and other ailments. Eli Coleman from Texas was born in 1846, and he recalled the harvesting of sassafras root for a number of medical uses. Carrie Fryer from Georgia recalled using it for measles. There are so many other herbs that were used by Black Americans, and I'll be sure to include the link to the book so you can check them out for yourself. While many of these herbs are still used by pharmaceutical companies today, many of them are shunned, like sassafras. Sassafras is where we get root beer from, but it's also used to create a certain substance which I can't mention here, but it's quite popular on the party scene. Wanda Fontenot concluded much of the knowledge held by secret doctors could be attributed to Native Americans. Native Americans had extensive contacts and social relations with African Americans. These indigenous groups had extensive knowledge in herbal and other remedies native to North America. Native populations would have been infinitely more familiar with the medicinal value of indigenous plants than whites or Africans. Fontenot found that secret doctors in Louisiana typically referred to plants having Native American origin or as Indian in their interviews. The WPA narratives also include references to Indians, Indian grandmothers, aunts, or mothers, and Indian plants. For example, Harriet Collins acknowledged a debt to Native American folk medicine. So Annie Turnbull Malone, Madam C.J. Walker, Chief Garrett Morgan, and all those that came after them are not only taking care of the roots from Africa, but a much closer source, roots from their American Indian ancestors. Black American hairstyles have shook the entire world all across the Americas. We see Dominicans, Brazilians, and more reinventing and reimagining the very techniques that our ancestors started. In Asia, men and women processing their hair to extremes to look like us, and somehow today, within certain groups within the Black community, there's a shame in straightening hair or manipulating our hair and mistaken for trying to fit into a European aesthetic. Some people say, go natural, don't use products, but as I have proven today, this is our natural. This is our art. Don't be ashamed of who we are. Thank you for watching Untold Great American Stories, and stay tuned for more.